Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Babbling Irons preview show with myself and Sloth. Leicester away. The games are coming thick and fast in December, Sloth. We forget what happened at the weekend. That never happened. That 5-2 defeat is a distant memory. We now play a team that are pretty much statistically the worst in the Premier League so far this season, but they're playing West Ham at the perfect time with their new manager, Ruud van Nistelrooy, at the helm. So, yeah, they're going to get the new manager bounce ready for West Ham, which it always seems to be that, but maybe it's just me. But we're going to break it down, look into exactly what we can do, how we can perhaps integrate Kudus back into the team now he's available, and look at some of the potential threats from Leicester's side as well, as they do have some quality in their squad that we need to be very careful of. So if you enjoy the breakdown, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. And Sloth, before we get into the stats and the overview and what we normally do, sum up Leicester's season so far and how they've bounced back into the Premier League, but not really bounced at all.
I think it's an incredibly frustrating one for them. I think it would be, I don't think it's unfair of me to say that most Leicester fans were not inspired by the appointment in the first place. I don't want to sound too mean to I just don't think he's a Premier League level manager. And the work Leicester have done off the pitch, I don't think it quite matches what was needed. And obviously they've had to be very mindful of the FFP regulations and what could happen if they were to try and spend. But to be honest with you, I think a case of them not quite doing enough. And even with Edouard, who is a player that I generally quite like, it just doesn't seem like he's really kicked on. And unfortunately for them, they've also lost statistically one of the best young players in Europe, attacking wise. And I don't really see a way that they can replace that output. It's not looking at Leicester. And I think Ruud van Nistelrooy is a very good appointment for them. He's someone who I think that even if they do go down, he'll stay. He has a set style of how he tries to play football. But with the facilities, the academy that they have and the young players they have as well, I would have been expecting a bit more this season from them in terms of what they've got results wise. And I think Cooper was the wrong man for the job in the first place, but I also think he was probably given too much time in general.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, as you said there, the results haven't been there for Leicester this season. They've only won 2 Premier League games so far in the league this season. One came away to Southampton and one was at home to Bournemouth. But other than that, they've really, really struggled. Obviously, coming off the back of a 4-1 defeat at Brentford into this clash. So let's take a look at the summary of the seasons, the tale of the tape between the two sides going into this fixture. So Leicester currently on 10 points to West Ham's 15. They've scored 16 goals to our 17. They've conceded 27 goals to our 24, and they are 16th rather than West Ham's 14th. So, to be honest, not too many discrepancies here. Just, West Ham have picked up a few more points. So that kind of tells you how poor West Ham have been this season. And when we look at the expected stats behind these, it also paints quite a damning statement or damning picture for Leicester, with expected points of just 9.62, which is the worst in the Premier League from the 15 games that we've played so far, or 16 games. I can't remember how many games it's been now. Our expected points is 13.75, so slightly higher. Leicester's expected goals scored is 15.20 to West Ham's 19.29. And then looking at both of their defensive records here, both teams, I mean, Leicester's expected goals conceded of 30.83 and West Ham 26.86. And as I mentioned just a moment before, Leicester's expected position should be rock bottom. They should be 20th in the Premier League so far, and West Ham should be one place below where they currently are in 15th. So again, when you look at these types of statistics, Sloth, it doesn't look good for either of these teams going into this clash. And is this maybe a case of, obviously Ruud van Nistelrooy is going to be coming into this. They're going to be full of energy, full of fresh ideas, have that, again, we mentioned it before, that new manager bounce to come into this. Lopetegui's under serious pressure once again after that defeat to Arsenal. He had it kind of alleviated from the Newcastle win, but now it's massively back on. And we go into crunch time in December with some really, really winnable fixtures on paper, and it has to start at Leicester this weekend. So, in your eyes, Sloth, is it a must-win in this game for Lopetegui?
I think it's not just a must-win. I think it's also one where he needs to be convincing. It needs to be a case of, controlling the match and maybe winning by 2 or 3 goals, in my opinion. And I don't want to put Leicester down too much, but I think that's the sort of thing that's required from Lopetegui, or the expectation from West Ham fans on Lopetegui, because I mentioned they'll be missing Fatawu. Apologies if I butchered the pronunciation there, but he is, or was, their most productive player by a mile. And there was a stat that he's actually produced the most attacking output of any young player in Europe. I think he, by quite some distance, it was averaging about 9.67 attacking outputs per 90 minutes. And when you lose someone like that with that pace, ability on the ball, it's a massive impact, even if you do have players like Mavididi, who's someone we've mentioned before, and particularly on the Twitter feed. But that sort of quality is incredibly hard to replace. And I think Lopetegui will be judged by whatever result comes from that. And if you don't beat Leicester convincingly with the way they're performing, then I personally think he should be going regardless. If it's a win which we scrape by, it's not good enough, to be honest. There's something to be argued for a team that is really struggling and parks the bus, but we should really be having the quality to beat a side like that regardless. And I just can't see a convincing Lopetegui performance.
Yeah, nice. It is hard to be confident, and I'm sure Leicester fans share that kind of entitlement with us, because we just find it very difficult to have any confidence at all at the moment, especially because it's so up and down. It seems to be this season that, we have a good win, not necessarily the best performance, but I thought Newcastle was a decent performance, enough to build on. And then it just goes flat. And then you see something like Arsenal unfold, and that's when the confidence goes right back down and the pressure goes right back up on someone like Julian Lopetegui. But again, when we're looking at Leicester, as you mentioned, they've been really poor this season. I think as you mentioned, Steve Cooper was never the right appointment for them in the first place. And I feel like they could have recruited better to, bring in a manager that was more suited to keeping the team up in the Premier League. There are plenty of managers out there to do that. So looking at Leicester's season so far, in a little bit more detail, we can see here that they've got the second worst defensive record in the Premier League with 27 goals conceded, and that matches their second worst expected defensive record in the Premier League with 30.83 expected goals against. They have the seventh worst offensive record in the Premier League with just 16 goals scored so far. And as we already alluded to before, they rank bottom for expected points with 9.62. They're averaging around 1.23 goals per game with an XG of 1.14. They're averaging over 2 goals conceded per game with an expected goals against of 2.13. So that is something that massively needs to improve under Ruud van Nistelrooy if they are going to have any chance of survival in the Premier League. And they're averaging around 46% possession in the Premier League so far. One interesting thing to note, Sloth, was their game against Brentford at the weekend, and they switched to a back three, where they've been predominantly playing a back four. So do you see that being the blueprint for them over the next few games while Ruud van Nistelrooy tries to instill a little bit more solidity into the team? I know it didn't exactly work at Brentford because they conceded 4 goals, but is a back three the system for them? Do you think they'll go to a back four? What's the situation? It's quite difficult for us to predict, really, because it's a new manager coming in.
I mean, Van Nistelrooy's tended to play a 4-3-3, and quite a defensive 4-3-3. He generally is quite happy to counter-attack. Like, that's what we saw in Holland with PSV. And he would use the pace of players like Bakayoko to carry them forward. And I think when you look at what he's inherited with players like Mavididi, who we mentioned, maybe even Patson Daka, Jamie Vardy, these are flying machines, in the words of Ray Wilkins. These are players with a lot of pace. And even Odsonne Edouard, he could easily go back into that very rigid defensive structure at the back and try and counter against teams. But I think that it's a very tricky dynamic to have. Patson Daka is someone who I really, really wanted in the Premier League, and he's not quite managed to make that step up. And I think that unless you are going to try and play that style of football where he can run onto it, I don't think he's going to be able to make that step up. So then you're looking at the likes of Edouard, Mavididi, and Vardy to try and get you the goals. Now, Vardy, undoubtedly a Premier League legend, and he can still finish, but can you rely on him for long periods of time is going to be the question that I think Van Nistelrooy is going to be asking himself. And, I think a back three would maybe be more of an option if they had reliable defenders, but I think it wouldn't be unfair to say that their standout defender's probably been James Justin. And I don't really see him as someone that you can rely on defensively in terms of keeping you in the Premier League. He's a good player, but is he going to be able to set a precedent for your back line and really carry you through a match where you're trying to park the bus? I don't see it. And I think if Van Nistelrooy does move 4-3-3, I'd be very surprised. I wouldn't be shocked if he does almost play a three at the back with Ndidi dropping deeper to try and really cover. And then, as I mentioned, those chipped balls that he became quite productive with in the previous Premier League spell into the wingers, into Mavididi, and I think that could be their best hope of trying to stay in the league. And again, I don't like writing teams off. It's December, so I don't mean to sound like I'm just sweeping Leicester under the rug, but I think it's going to be a very tough ask. As I mentioned, with the loss of Fataru, then Leicester are going to be really up against it.
Yeah, agreed. And look, to be fair, they are just outside the Premier League relegation zone right now. And there have been teams, including West Ham, that have been massively underperforming so far this season and really struggling. You think of Wolves, Crystal Palace, West Ham, all of those in that bracket. And then you've got Southampton, Ipswich, Leicester themselves, who are another newly promoted side. So there are going to be a few teams down there this season battling for those free or trying to stay away from those bottom three spots. So it could be, a run of 3 or 4 games could see Leicester, give themselves a little bit of momentum away from it. Is Ruud van Nistelrooy going to be the person to be able to do that for them? Again, as you mentioned, with the types of injuries they've got and, the squad that he has at his disposal to stay in the Premier League, it's a massive ask. It's a massive, massive ask, and it's going to be really difficult to do that. But shifting the focus back to West Ham, Sloth, Mo Kudus is back available after 5 Premier League games. How much of an importance is that now into a really, really important, crucial run for Lopetegui in December? Because we've lacked that ball carrying, midfield presence. Whether he's going to play him on the right, the left, maybe as the number 10. Does he have to come straight into the team for you, or does he work his way back in from the bench?
I mean, for me, I would personally put Somerville on the left. I'd keep him there, and I'd probably start with Antonio just to make just to keep the message of you can't just walk straight back into the team, even with a 5-2 loss. I think it's important that we don't just throw players back in. And Antonio, for all his frustrations, I don't think warrants being dropped for a player who did something so stupid against Tottenham. It's not a case of a player who has just picked up a few too many yellow cards. It's a player who was completely and utterly brain dead and has cost us in multiple ways across this spell where he's been out. So for me, I don't think you start him. I think he is good enough. Like, I think he easily walks into our starting 11. That's not the point. I think if you set a precedent that players can do that and then just swan straight back into the first 11, it's a bit of a dangerous one. I personally would like to see him come on and play in the middle and be that attacking outlet who can carry the ball, use his pace. And I think that's where we've really struggled with Antonio is he's lost a yard of pace. He's still quick, but he's not as ballistic as he used to be. And I think Kudus easily comes in, replaces that, and let's face it, he's a better finisher as well. So it's a case of I would play him maybe the 50th minute or the 60th minute if we're not winning comfortably by then, or maybe do it a bit sooner. But I think you can't just bring him straight in, not after he's done something so stupid.
See, I'm I find it very difficult to answer that as well, because I completely agree with your point, Sof. You can't really set the precedent of a player, being so stupid, getting himself suspended for 5 games. Again, it got extended. He wasn't to know that, but it was stupid at the way at Spurs, and it's cost us in the consequential games. But I'm tempted to just bring him in, man. I'm tempted to bring him in. We've been so poor, and I wanted to pose this to you, Sloth. I know we've spoke about it before about getting Kudus into almost a midfield 3 as the furthest forward or the number 10, and operating in that way. What about something like this? If we saw a lineup similar to this, I know that this would maybe be a little bit harsh on a couple of players, like Carlos Soler could easily play instead of Lucas Paqueta as an example. But is there maybe an option where Kudus comes into that midfield 3 like this, and we play Somerville, Bowen, Antonio as the front 3 still, and Kudus is given kind of that room to operate as the number 10 with Paqueta and Alvarez as an example, providing that shield underneath? Or is this way too open? And as you mentioned, is the more important point that Kudus shouldn't be allowed to come straight back into the starting 11?
I think this is the only sort of saving grace that we have at the moment. as we look at the fixtures, we have got a conundrum of where we now play a quality player. For me, though, a big problem is Paqueta. Against Arsenal, I think he showed maybe 10 minutes worth of the 90 that he could do something, he could contribute. I think for the rest of it, he was awful. And again, I've been very critical of him, and I don't think unjustly. I think he was
100%.
excellent against Newcastle, but he just does not concentrate, and you cannot rely on him for a full game of football. I'd drop him, and I would be looking at, a part of that change is to drop Souček. If I was Souček, I'd be furious.
What would your midfield 3 be for this game then?
I think I would probably put Soler, maybe Edson Alvarez. When he came on in the second half, we didn't concede, so that's a positive.
That was the defining result, but
it's a very low bar, isn't it? At the moment. But I think that I just wouldn't play Paqueta. I'd maybe go Souček, Soler, and Alvarez. Try that, but I still think the big issue, and I can't see him dropping Paqueta, but if you'd this 12 months ago, there wouldn't have been a question over Paqueta's place. But I think he's been consistently poor for so long now that we were questioning David Moyes at times about picking players who were consistently poor. Lopetegui is doing exactly that, and it needs to be questioned. It's only fair. So I do think that the big issue here is I would just drop Paqueta, and I would probably Soler, Souček, and Alvarez as that midfield 3. You can bring Paqueta on off the bench. You can bring Guido Rodriguez on if you need to try and dictate the play a bit more. But I don't think that keeping Paqueta on the pitch is what you need, particularly against a team with pace. And because if he gives the ball away and they're in setup, and say he knocks it through to Mavididi, you know, that's a countermand to suicide against a lot of these teams who will just be happy to pick when you are trying to break against them or when you're trying to break them down. So yeah, that would be my big issue with that setup. And to be honest, I can't see maybe the news that he's not going to have to give evidence in the court case in Brazil or whatever it is that's going on now is going to see a brand new Paqueta. But for me, I don't think he warrants a place in the starting 11.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely fair. I don't think his performances have been good enough, and yeah, as you say, if he does get dropped, I think it's deserved. And someone like Carlos Soler deserves to stay in the starting 11 as well. So it'd be interesting to see what Lopetegui does do with, you know, the likes of Lucas Paqueta, Mo Kudus, even Fabianski Areola, whether he switches that back as well or whether he sticks with Fabianski. There's quite a few decisions for him to make going into this. So a big game sloth, a lot on the line. A Tuesday night, I think it's 8:15 kickoff as well, so quite a late one. But what's your prediction? What's your score prediction? Who's going to score? Are we going to win the game? How are you feeling?
I'm going to go with a 2-1 to us. I can't see us keeping a clean sheet, regardless of who's in goal. But I think we'll nick it. And as I said, I don't think it will be a convincing performance. If we just manage to scrape it, which I can see, I don't think it will be a good game. sorry everyone watching. I think it's going to be dross.
Yeah, no, I agree. I can't predict a win, can I predict a win? You know what, I'll go over 2-1 win. I think we're just going to edge it. I think, as you mentioned, I think it's going to be a pretty poor game, but I think, you know, we have Mo Kudus available. I think he might, as you mentioned, he might come off the bench and make that decisive impact towards the end. And yeah, just think we have enough for Leicester to edge this game. And, you know, as you mentioned, if we don't win this game, massive pressure on Lopetegui and the rest of the team. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Let us know down below in the comments, what are your predictions for this game? Are West Ham going to come away from Leicester with a victory, or are we going to crumble again and drop points where we shouldn't be? Let us know your predictions in the comments. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed the breakdown. Subscribe to the channel for more content. And Sloth, until the next one.
Come on, you irons.
Come on, you irons.